Welcome to Teacher Self-Care During Distance Learning. This webinar is part of a webinar series created by the Behavior Support Specialist team from Albuquerque Public Schools. This webinar was created in the spring of 2020 as we find ourselves moved from our traditional classroom settings to distance learning and virtual classrooms. The purpose of this webinar is to focus on teacher self-care and how we can take productive and proactive steps to ensuring that we are taking care of ourselves as educators during this time. However, if you're watching this in the future and you find yourself in a more traditional classroom, many of the strategies that we're going to be talking about today pertain to those educators working in both the virtual classroom setting and the traditional classroom setting. We hope that this might be a way for you to reframe your self-care and make sure that it becomes an intentional and valued part of your day. I am your presenter today. My name is Anna Kay. And I am one of the behavior support specialists with Albuquerque Public Schools. Just as many of you find yourselves working from home, I too am working from home right now, and I'm going to ask in advance for your patience and grace if I have any sort of technical difficulties here, or if my dog starts barking at the mailman. It's the wonders of working from home, isn't it? Now, before we proceed, I want to take a moment to thank you, all of the educators across Albuquerque Public Schools, across the nation as a whole. We know that this is an incredibly difficult time. We appreciate all that you are doing to meet your diverse students' needs, and we acknowledge that this requires a lot of physical, mental, and emotional energy. We see your hard work and we appreciate your unwavering efforts. So why are we talking about self-care? I'm sure that you are all familiar with the little spiel that happens when you first board an airplane before it takes off, and the flight attendant talks through what everybody needs to do in case of an emergency. And we all know if we need oxygen masks and they drop down, what does the flight attendant tell you if you're traveling with a small child? That you need to put on your own mask first before putting on the mask of someone else. And I think that is, it's been used before. I'm not the first to make that connection, but that is precisely why we need to be thinking about self-care, particularly during stressful times, like now, like this new virtual teaching world, that we need to put on our own masks first, metaphorically, before we can do the hard work that needs to be done to support our students and our families. That is, we need to make sure that we are mentally, physically, and emotionally well before we can effectively attend to the needs of others. We know that during this time, students are constantly searching for reassurance from their teachers, especially with everything, the new stress of where we find ourselves now. And we deliver these messages of reassurance through our words, but more so through our actions and our demeanor. So when we find ourselves in stressful situations in the moment, it's important that we take care of ourselves for our own physical, emotional, and mental well-being. But this also provides us an opportunity to model appropriate coping skills for our students. So often, both in the traditional classroom and in the virtual classroom, I find myself asking, I am stressed right now. What coping skills or what social emotional competencies am I going to model for my students as I work through this stress? And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but when we're thinking of those social emotional competencies, we're thinking of things like self management, social awareness, responsible decision making, self awareness, and relationship skills. And when we're thinking of self care and how we are taking care of ourselves, we are using a lot of these social emotional competencies. And when we're actively taking care of ourselves in front of our students, not only are we assuring that we are giving our best self to them, but we're also providing a space to model how to take care of ourselves when we are stressed or sad or frustrated or those big feelings that we all feel as human beings. I'm just going to talk about this briefly. There is a body of research um, that shows that there is a direct link between teacher, mental, and emotional fatigue and student behavior. Now, I want to make sure that I point out that correlation here does not imply causation. There is a correlation between teacher mental emotional fatigue and student behavior. That's not necessarily what is causing the student behavior. But I know for myself personally, when I was a classroom teacher, that when I was having a hard time with my own physical health or mental health, that the lens at which I looked at student behavior was different, was compromised. When I responded to challenging behavior in my classroom, that response was maybe not as well crafted as when I was in a healthier physical or social emotional place. My relationships were impacted by my physical or mental health, both the relationships with my students, but also with my colleagues and sort of in a greater scope of my social circle. And the reason I bring this up is because we know that our physical and mental health are such important aspects of what makes us good professionals and strong teachers. And we need to make sure that we are intentionally and systematically putting on our own metaphorical mask first to make sure that we're able to respond to our students in a way that is intentional and supportive and purposeful. And we can't do that unless we are taking good care of ourselves. So some steps we can do to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, both our physical and our emotion, in a physical and emotional sense. Basically, just like we teach our students, we need to recognize our emotions. We need to really recognize what our brain and our body is telling us about how we are feeling, either in the moment or kind of long term. We need to create a structured and realistic self-care plan. And we need to be really intentional about our self-care. And not just intentional, but make it a priority. I know that for myself personally and for a lot of my fellow teachers, that's hard. Often we put the physical and emotional and mental well-being of others before our own. But I'm going to encourage us to think about how we can be really intentional about making our self-care a priority. So when we think of self-care, or I won't say we, when I think of self-care, my brain used to go to kind of those Instagram pictures of self-care, right? I would automatically think of a luxurious vacation or a deep tissue massage or a yoga retreat, right? These are all wonderful examples of self-care. But if I'm in the middle of teaching, I can't say, sorry, kids, hold on. I'm really stressed. I need to go get a deep tissue massage. Like, absolutely not. That's not realistic. So while those are great examples of self-care, we need to start to come up with other examples of self-care that are realistic and productive in the moment. And we can do that by creating a unique self-care plan. So when we're thinking about creating a self-care plan that's impactful, it needs to be designed to fit our unique needs and interests. So a good example for me, I know a lot of people, it's really helpful for them if they take a nice, long, hot bath. That's a self-care strategy that works for them. That does not work for me. When I am stressed, I have a really hard time sitting still, and sitting still in a hot bath does not make me feel any better, right? That's a self-care strategy that doesn't work for me. It doesn't fit my unique needs and interests. So we need to be mindful of what works for us when we're thinking about our self-care plan, and maybe move away from those ideas of the Instagram pictures of self-care. We also need to make sure that the self-care plan we're creating is designed to fit one or more of our many roles. As humans, we have many different roles and aspects of our unique self. And often we need to take time to identify which of those roles need to be supported through self-care. And finally, when we're making this self-care plan, it needs to be intentional, productive, and purposeful. We'll talk about some ways to do that. So now I'm going to share with you, the next couple slides are lists of self-care ideas. These ideas were created to be something that you could possibly do now in the moment when you are feeling stressed, right? We're moving away from those deep tissue massages, which are great self-care, but not necessarily practical in the here and now. And thinking about self-care that we can do in the moment. So this first set of ideas really pertains to our basic human needs, right? Prioritizing sleep, making and enjoying a healthy snack or meal, spending time outside, taking a brain break or a shake break, just like we provide for our students. We need those things too, those breaks in our day. Mindful breathing, spending time with a pet. These ideas all revolve around a lot of our basic human needs. And I know that many of us, when we're feeling stressed or overworked or overwhelmed, these tend to be the things that go out the window first, right? But we know, based on what we need as humans to survive, that these are critically important to both our physical well-being and our mental well-being. Plus, these are really easy things to integrate into our busy lives, as long as we are intentional about them and prioritize them. When we're thinking about self-care, we also need to take into consideration the connections with others and the relationships that we foster. Now, more than ever, as many of us find ourselves quarantined in our homes, those elements of relationship and connection with others are different. In many cases, they are stifled. So another part of your unique self-care plan might be to prioritize ways that you are still able to connect with others. Maybe it's calling a loved one on the phone, writing a postcard, or a letter that expresses gratitude to someone else. Hosting a virtual lunch with your colleagues or your students. I know a lot of teachers are hosting almost like cafeteria duty, where it's not a required time with their students, but they create a Google Meet and students are asked are invited to come, and those that are able to come and they eat their lunch together. This is really a beautiful time to connect with our students, but also to provide that self care for ourselves, that connection with people we care about. It's also important that we're prioritizing sharing our feelings or concerns with trusted colleagues or an administrator, perhaps, and making sure that we are asking for help when we need to. This particular list of self care ideas is focused around creating structure for ourselves. As I was a classroom teacher in a traditional classroom setting, my day revolved around the bell schedule, right? I lived and died by that schedule, and it provided so much structure and therefore predictability and comfort for me. Now that I'm working from home, that there is no bell schedule, right? And it's been really important for me to create structure and a schedule for myself, um, because that provides, again, that predictability and comfort, but also makes me feel more productive, which helps me with my own personal self worth. Another way to do that is making a to do list. Doesn't it feel so good to cross things off? I often think of my to do lists as self care because it validates the work I'm doing, um, and also provides, again, some structure for my day. In the same way, taking time to make a success list. A colleague of mine, Molly Keys, shared this idea with me that when she is feeling down or feeling sad, she starts just making a list of things that she knows she's good at. And it can be in any aspect of her life. Um, it's amazing that once you start to write down a few things that you know you are good at, and after a while, those successes start pouring out of your pencil or pen. And you'll find yourself, I imagine, at the end of that list thinking, wow, look at all this stuff that I am good at. Some of them are small things, some of them are big things. But what a boost to our self confidence, and to our overall self care. I also think during this time, it's really important to establish and maintain boundaries. I know that many of our teachers out there are overwhelmed by the number of calls and emails that they're receiving from parents and students, not being able to log into the assignment or can't remember when the assignment's due or have other questions they can't ask in person. I'm encouraging teachers to be available in a professional sense, but to also think about how you can establish and maintain boundaries professionally and boundaries in terms of your time. So maybe sending out a note to parents saying, I am available to answer emails from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. I cannot answer emails during the times that I am on Google Meets with my students, but I am available again to answer emails from 1 until 4 p.m. By creating some of these boundaries, both parents and students know your availability, and that provides some structure for them. But it also helps to ensure that the time that you are setting aside to teach, and also the time you're setting aside to spend time with your family or engage in other self care practices, that time is established. It's important, it's sacred in a sense. And creating those boundaries can ensure, again, that the self care plan goes into effect and that we are intentional about creating time for ourselves. I also really like the idea of making a list of things I can control and things that I cannot control. I've made this list several times. Usually it's the same things on the list, but it does really help me to write it out. And finally, taking some time to disconnect from technology. This is important all the time. For me personally, this is really difficult, but I find that if I do set aside an hour in the evenings, that I just turn off my phone or my computer and I am unavailable via technology. Um, Again, it really creates that time and space to make sure that I'm engaging in self care and putting on my own metaphorical mask before I turn my phone back on and maybe put on the mask of others if they need it. So, after kind of mulling through some of these self care ideas, of course, this was a really short list. By no means is this exhaustive. And I'm sure you can come up with many more self care ideas that are unique to you and again fit your unique interests and needs. But I encourage you as you're kind of mulling over these self care ideas to start to write down a self care plan. When we write down a plan for ourselves, this creates some accountability. Um, it also, again, creates some of that structure and predictability, and there's safeness in that. And as you're creating your self care plan, I encourage you to think about times of the day that you're going to engage in these self care ideas. Um, and also give yourself some space to test drive how you felt after you used some of these self care tools. Maybe how you felt in the moment, and then how you felt long term, and how these tools are working for you. And it's okay to say that, you know what, this self care tool isn't working for me right now, or it's not working for me at all, and I need to try something else. When we're thinking about this plan and we're modifying it, we need to make sure that we are including self-care ideas again that are intentional and purposeful and impactful. And the only way to see if they're really impactful is to make sure that we're trying them out. But as much as self-care is important, I want to make some space to talk about radical acceptance. Um, so, this radical acceptance is the concept behind really sitting with our feelings. Um, and in the current state of things, we can do a lot of self care measures that are really extremely beneficial. But we also need to take some time to recognize that it doesn't necessarily fix the larger looming problems or feelings indefinitely. Self care is extremely important and it will help, but it doesn't necessarily fix some of the big problems that we're facing right now in terms of distance learning and quarantine situations. So I do encourage you to also take time to really sit with your feelings as you're able to, and take some time to recognize that this reality um, is not permanent. These big feelings that we're feeling are not forever. And this too shall pass, as my mom would say. I also want to make some space to encourage you to ask for help as you need it. This video was created in the month of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. This is a very important month, but in my humble opinion, I think it should be Mental Health Awareness Month every month of the year. Um, it is important that we recognize the challenges that we are experiencing, and that as part of our self care plan, if we need to, we also create space to ask for help, whether it's a loved one that we trust, or perhaps one of these resources here. The New Mexico Crisis and Access Line, you have both the phone number and the website there. I recognize that not all of our viewers are living in New Mexico right now, so we also have the National Suicide Prevention Hotline and website for you. And finally, that last bullet there is the Albuquerque Public Schools Employee Assistance Program. That's their phone number to their office. But you can also find more information about how their program works and their resources by going to the Albuquerque Public Schools website and just looking up the EAP or Employee Assistance Program. They really provide some wonderful resources. And if you're an APS employee, I recommend you check out what they have to offer. Also, if you would like to reach out to our behavior support specialist team, there's a couple ways to do that. You can find us on Twitter. You can email our team directly. We also have a website, and on that website, we post lots of resources for both caregivers and teachers and educators of all kinds. If you are an APS um, general education educator and would like for one of us to observe in your classroom or meet with you one-on-one, either face-to-face or virtually, you can put in a ticket requesting to ask our support through the APS intranet. We're in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and you can find a link to our ticketing system by going to the CNI department within the APS intranet. I know this was a really quick presentation. My hope is that as you are able, you take some time to write down some of your self-care ideas, make them into a self-care plan, and really experiment with that plan. And I hope that you are able to find some resources and some ideas that help to ensure that you are putting on your mask before you walk out and put on the mask of all the learners that you support every day. Thank you for your work, and thank you for joining.